Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to another video. I'm your host Caleb, and Newcastle United are plotting a move for Hugo Ekitike. This is a man Newcastle United were interested in the first January window of their takeover, so that'll be January 2022. On deadline day, I think they'd agreed a deal with Ekitike, and it was so close to the point where he got to the airport and he basically turned around and said, no, this is too big of a step for my career. He ended up signing for Paris Saint-Germain, it didn't work out, and then he went to Frankfurt, where his absolute stock has absolutely smashed it. He scored, I believe, 22 goals last season in the Bundesliga and has now a £100 million release clause. According to Fabrizio Romano and other journalists such as Alex Crook, his preferred destination is the Premier League. Fabrizio has reported interest from other clubs such as Liverpool and Chelsea. He has been pushing the Newcastle agenda out. Keep an eye on Newcastle United's move for Hugo Ekitike. I think there's other reports from other journalists about maybe Manchester United, but maybe down as a lower down option. So let's assess this. Chelsea have stolen a lot of Newcastle United's targets. Obviously the most recent one being João Pedro. They stole obviously Liam Delap as well. Chelsea apparently are putting £100 million release clause on not a release clause, £100 million price tag on Nicholas Jackson's head. That to me says they're not planning to lose him, so they're going to have three strikers to start the season off with Delap, Jackson and João Pedro. In terms of the left, obviously Madueke has left. They've obviously bought in Gitton. They've obviously got in Neto. They've obviously got Palmer. They've got plenty of depth because there's so for example someone like João Pedro can operate out wide as well. Maybe they want another winger out there. I'm not 100% sure. If this was the case, would they be willing to spend £86 million? That's what it is. £100 million, €100 million release clause Ekitike has on his head. That's £86 million. I mean, maybe. I mean, he's smashing up goals. You see the way Chelsea like the sort of young talent. That's what they sort of go for with this model under Todd Bowley. Not signing anyone above the sort of age of 23. Ekitike fits that profile. £86 million is a lot of money to spend, though. They've seen their sort of mistakes with the likes of Mudryk, etc., when it hasn't worked out. It's going to be... I don't think this one will go to Chelsea. I thought João Pedro to Chelsea could happen. And I thought that his priority was to live in London. With Ekitike, it might be a bit different. The other club who's interested and who I think he's most likely to go to is Liverpool. Obviously, I don't see Liverpool getting Alexander Isak this summer. I think next summer it will happen. So therefore, they obviously need a striker. It looks like Luis Diaz might be going to Barcelona. Darwin Núñez, I believe the talks of Napoli broke down today. Therefore, Ekitike looks like a strong target. Whether Liverpool would spend £86 million on him, that's a lot of money. Obviously, they could potentially go for someone cheaper. I know Osterman's been linked, etc. Now, if we were talking specifically about Newcastle, this isn't going to be an Isak out, Ekitike in. According to reports of Luke Edwards of the Telegraph, they want him to play alongside Alexander Isak. Now, Eddie Howe never plays 4-4-2. It doesn't really happen. You never see it happen. However, towards the end of the season, we saw pretty much from that Carabao Cup semi-final second leg onwards, not every single week, but there'll be a few times, for example, big games against Chelsea, for example, Eddie Howe will go to the 3-4-2-1, where Livramento and maybe Jacob Murphy were the fullbacks because Hall was out injured. The fullbacks, or the wing backs, are basically ones that occupy the width, so the sort of strikers or forward to play in behind the striker in the 3-4-2-1, which was mainly Gordon and Barnes, they would play very narrow, so they play very centrally. If this is the formation Eddie Howe's looking to take, which I think it is, for two reasons. One, he doesn't seem to want to buy a centre midfielder. Playing with two in the middle in the 3-4-2-1 would allow him to have that few mini centre midfielders. And number two, it looks like he wants another centre back, although that could be to do with age, but he's going to have four centre backs at the club now. So if he goes to 3-4-2-1, he's going to have two very narrow forwards. Basically, Barnes and Gordon, when they were occupying these positions, they're playing centrally, basically off Isak. If that's the case, Ekitike is basically playing a second striker. He's not playing out wide. Therefore, that means that Ekitike could definitely be incorporated straight into the team. The interesting thing is now Newcastle have a lot of squad depth. They'll have Alanga, who they want to fit in. They obviously got Barnes, who's finished the season really well. Gordon finished the season, had a poor season, but he's still probably ahead of Barnes in the pecking order. I think even though Murphy had the season of his life, I do think he might get pushed to the side. The question is, do you spend 86 million on somebody who Newcastle don't necessarily need? We know they want a backup striker. Craig Hope broke the news that Newcastle United were interested in Vissa. Watkins was also linked, but I think that's absolute nonsense. Ollie Watkins will not go to Newcastle United. This is an interesting one, but there is a reported £50 million price tag on his head. Keith Downey said maybe 40 million. He obviously is a reporter for Sky Sports. Newcastle United had a long-standing interest in Ekitike. If Newcastle were to pursue Ekitike, the 3-4-2-1 formation would work for him, and I think it will work like this. Ekitike comes in for that first season, he plays alongside Alexander Isak. They could change it to a 3-4-1-2, with maybe Gordon playing in the 10 or Barnes playing in the 10, I don't know. And then those two up top together. What happens is Ekitike learns off Isak for that first summer or that first season. Next season, when he's got 2 years left on his deal, Isak goes to Liverpool. Ekitike becomes the main man. I don't see Isak leaving this summer. I don't think that Ekitike, however, is good enough yet. He's still Premier League unproven to just lead the line straight away for Newcastle. We're going to be in the Champions League next year as well. And obviously competing in the Premier League. He's Premier League unproven. 86 million is a lot of money. I do think Newcastle United probably transfer and negotiate lower, although reports are saying that he needs to have his release clause brought up. But I do think we'll look at Frankfurt's history. They're not necessarily going to keep him in terms of the fact they've went profits made for a player. They'll sell him on Omar Marmoush. Obviously, I think it was £67 million to Man City, Luka Jovic to Real Madrid. They've sold other players, for example, Kolo Muani, 95 million, I think that was euros in that case. Might have been pounds, I'm not 100% sure. The point is that they will sell players on. If Newcastle will probably get £75 million, maybe if they were to get that sort of deal. I don't see Chelsea matching that. Liverpool potentially could. If Newcastle were to get him in, he'll play as a second striker. His age is good, and he'll probably be that long-term solution in terms of when Isak does leave the club, because he will leave Newcastle. Unless Newcastle United win the Champions League or the Premier League next year, which is not going to happen. Therefore, Isak will leave Newcastle next year when he's got 2 years left on his contract. Newcastle gets a substantial fee for him. Ekitike would lead the line. I do think that this is someone that Eddie Howe has had long-term interest in. Like I said at the beginning of the video, they looked at him in the summer of January of 2022. We know that Eddie Howe likes his long-term targets: Mark Gahey, James Trafford, Anthony Elanga. He likes his long-term targets. It'll be interesting to see if this happens. Financially, it makes more sense than Johan Visser. However, because of Visser's age, Newcastle United have other positions they need to strengthen. I don't think Newcastle United needs another goalkeeper. I think Trafford isn't better than Nick Pope right now. I don't think Newcastle United should be paying anything as to what Burnley are demanding. But the centre-back position is something that they do need to strengthen. They've got 3 centre-backs. One is injury-prone, is Van Botman. Although he is back fit, I believe, and he's going to have a whole pre-season, so Newcastle will take him slowly, but he will have to play more games next season. Burn and Shaw are both 33. They're both getting older, but Lascelles is back. You know, he's obviously going to be like that sort of squad rotational player, etc. Although if Newcastle United were to move him on, that's good PSR profit, etc. Scalvini is the one that's been linked as that new Newcastle United centre-back. Moreto has said, I think, 50 million euros, but then Mark Douglas of the iPaper has said £50 million. I don't see Newcastle United paying £50 million for someone who's just had a ACL injury along with a long-term shoulder injury. It doesn't make sense. The reason why Newcastle United were going in for Scalvini is because he's supposed to be on a cheap price because of his injury. He's seen as a cheaper alternative to Mark Gahey, and he's seen as sort of someone who's younger, more assigned. I think if Newcastle United could get for maybe 37 with 5 million in add-ons, which is £42 million, I do think they'll say yes. But there is a host of clubs interested, as Fabrizio did mention. But Scalvini is said to be interested and flattered by the sort of interest of Newcastle United, and Tonali spoken very well. Tonali, I definitely believe, does love the club. I'm not saying Tonali want to leave. In the future, maybe he will, but the way the club supported him during that sort of gambling ban for a year, he's really kicked on. I think it's a really nice environment. I think Scalvini would absolutely embrace it. He seems like the type of person, he's a proper stuck-in defender. He loves to slide tackle. The Newcastle United fans cheer every single tackle, that every single run they do. I think Scalvini will absolutely love it. Newcastle United were to get Scalvini done for 40 million, they'll get Ekitike done. Let's say worst case 80 million. That's 120 million they spend there, and then they spend obviously 52 million on Alanga. That's 170 million. Newcastle United's budget is 150 to 175 according to Mark Douglas of the iPaper. That is before outgoings. Obviously, I do expect Longstaff to leave. Obviously, the issue with Longstaff is Newcastle United is to do with the Champions League sort of squads. I think it's homegrown talent. Newcastle United don't have enough of that. They obviously lost Elliot Anderson, for example. I think the only players that might risk, I'm not 100% sure on the details, but that's the reason why Newcastle United are looking for 15 million. I do think it's a fair price, but I do think Newcastle United should be cashing in at, they could have cashed in at 10 million, but they should have gone to Leeds and said, right, 12 million up front rather than 10 plus 2 in add-ons. 12 million up front, maybe plus 1 in add-on, 30 million. I think that's a fair deal. That's pure profit for Newcastle United. But a player of his experience, I can understand why they want more, but he has got 1 year left on his deal. Apparently, Leeds are interested in Willock. I believe there's a whole host of clubs that will come in for Willock because I think he's more versatile. I think he's a better player than Longstaff, and he's a younger age. I think Palace, I think Fulham, these types of clubs we'll see later on towards the window. If Newcastle are using the 3-4-2-1 formation, they won't need as much centre mids. However, if Willock does go or Longstaff does go, I would expect Newcastle United to get a replacement, someone cheap, somebody who's okay playing that sort of backup role. I think Jack Rudoni of Coventry is someone who's young, he's 24, someone that Eddie Howe can develop. Look at what he's done with Livermore, look at what he's done with Hull. If Rudoni comes in, he needs to understand that look, he's not going to start every single game. However, he's going to get games in the Carabao Cup. He's going to, when there's injuries etc., he's going to come in for that sort of role. And maybe next season, as in the season after next, that could be an opportunity to kick in. He's a physical guy. I think he could definitely be a Joelinton replacement, etc. One of the three will get injured. Bruno Tonali, Joelinton. Therefore, he could be that next step up, whether that's Louis Miley, whether that's him. I think that Newcastle United, they're working on one deal at a time because they have no sporting director, they have no CEO, I believe. So it is a bit slow. However, I do think they will get a centre back in and they will get a backup forward in. They will want someone of Ekitike's quality. I think Vissar Newcastle United will look at his price given his age and say no. And I don't think they want someone like a Calvert-Lewin who's pretty much similar to Callum Wilson. He barely scored last season. I think got 2 goals last season. Ekitike will be seen as a long-term plan in terms of he'll play this season, but he'll be Isak's successor next season. I think it's a very exciting time to be a Newcastle United fan, but I do think they need more squad depth if they're going to be able to compete. I think another midfielder should not be underestimated as well. I think Rudoni will cost maybe 10 to 15 million. 15, that means that Coventry have tripled profit in within a year. I think they'll accept that. But yeah, for Newcastle United, I think 3 more players. Forget about the goalkeeper. Doesn't matter what price they can get Trafford in. I don't think that's a priority. Get another striker in, get a centre back in, and if they let one of the midfielders go, a midfielder in, because I think towards the end of the season you saw the drop off when Joelinton was out. It was too big, so they maybe need someone else to sort of cover. That's what I would do, and that's what I think Newcastle United will do. They probably have other targets lined up, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, thanks for watching.